Alright, so hi YouTube. We're currently live on Twitch and we're gonna have a nice little discussion about Rivalry of Warlords and Gozen match. Everything that applies here also applies to There Can Be Only One. So Chad is here with us. We're basically gonna be talking about the different interactions and the things that you can and cannot do while these cards are face up on the field. We're gonna be reading over the official PDF released by Konami. This is kind of an old thing. This is a couple of years old. But yeah, so this PDF was released by Konami, and they basically outlined what you can and cannot do while Rivalry goes in, and now There Can Be Only One, which wasn't out when this came out, but There Can Be Only One also applies the same way. So, what do these cards do when these cards resolve? They're continuous trap, blah blah blah, make it so you can only control one type or one attribute, or only like one monster of a specific type in the case of There Can Be Only One. So when the card resolves, you check all your face-up cards, all your face-up monsters, and then you have to send to the grave as it resolves in order to hold, like, to have on the field only the monsters that you are legally allowed to control due to the effect of the card. You get to pick one, essentially, so if you have, like, two different types and your opponent flips the Rivalry, then you have to, like, pick down to only one type. So what monsters can I summon while these cards are active? So I'm going to go over this list, and I'm basically going to explain to you what you can and cannot do as you go. So while Rivalry or Gozen is active and you have a face-up monster, you cannot summon monsters that are a different type attribute from the monsters you already control. As opposed to There Can Be Only One, where you cannot summon the same type, but you get where this is going. So you cannot do any of the following to put a monster with the wrong type / attribute on your side of the field. You cannot normal summon. You cannot tribute summon. So, like, normal summon is kind of self-explanatory. Like, if you have a zombie and Rivalry's face up, you can't just normal summon a spellcaster. Like, that doesn't make sense. You're not legally allowed to attempt to perform the action. Now, why it's interesting with something like tribute summoning is if you only have, like, a zombie on the field, you only have one monster and it's a zombie, and you want to tribute summon a warrior that's like level 6 or something like that. You are not allowed to attempt to tribute summon a warrior over a zombie under There Can Be Only, not There Can Be Only, under Rivalry of Warlords, because you are not allowed to attempt to perform a summon of something that would be an illegal monster in the off case that the monster that you have on the field would be able to remain there. So this is kind of the same reason why you have XC Summon, Synchro Summon, Fusion Summon here. Link Summon also applies, but Link Summon came out after this PDF. But for all of these, you are not legally allowed to, like, attempt to overlay 2 warriors for a fiend. Even though, when you perform your summon, afterwards you still would only control one type. It's the same thing as, like, you can't, if you have, like, a Cyberse and a warrior under There Can Be Only One, you can't overlay them for another Cyberse. So you're not allowed to attempt the summon of a monster that would be illegal if, like, even though you know the monster that you currently have on field won't be there after you perform the summon, you have to take into consideration that because the game doesn't recognize that they won't be there after the summon is performed, the monster you're attempting to summon is not an illegal summon that you can make under these cards. Flip summon is kind of the same thing. You are, however, allowed to flip a card by a card effect. So, like, if you have, like, a face-up Subterra Guru and a face-down Subterra Guru, and you have There Can Be Only One face-up, you are allowed to activate Final Battle and flip the Guru that you have on the field. In which case, immediately after the Guru is flipped, it will be sent to the graveyard. So we'll get into that in a second. Special summon a monster with its own effect, so you can't, like, Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon's not a good example. You can't Jester Confit while you have a monster of a different type, obviously. Activate a card or effect that would have to special summon a monster of the wrong type / attribute. So this is interesting. Under a card like There Can Be Only One, for example, I think a good example of this would be the Cosmo archetype. So if you have, like, a Cosmo Tin Can, which is a psychic, and There Can Be Only One is face up on the field, you are legally allowed, if you have in your hand a psychic monster, a Cosmo psychic monster that you'd be allowed to summon with the Tin Can, and a Cosmo machine monster like one of the ships, you're legally allowed to activate the effect of Cosmo Tin Can because you do have a legal target in the form of your machine monster that you'd be able to summon under the There Can Be Only One. However, because your Tin Can banishes itself for cost, if you don't control any more monsters on the field, you are legally allowed to summon that other psychic Cosmo monster that you have from your hand, because when the effect resolves, you no longer control a psychic. But if you only had a psychic target when you're attempting to use the effect of Tin Can, that activation is illegal. So that's a really interesting thing. That's why they specify that would have to special summon a monster of the wrong attribute. So you're legally allowed to activate it if you have other targets, and then when it resolves, if you have, because your field is cleared, if the monster like tributes or banishes itself for cost, you're able to legally summon that monster even though it was of the same type, and no, you do not have to reveal to your opponent that you did have originally a legal target when you did it, you know? So that's like a really neat interaction that you can have with these. So in the case of a card like Psyframe Gamma, okay? Psyframe Gamma reads as follows, says, when your opponent activates a monster effect while you control no monsters, you can special summon both this card from your hand and one Psyframe driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard, and if you do, negate the activation, okay? So this effect, under There Can Be Only One, is legal to activate, okay? Provided that you do not control a psychic monster when you're attempting to activate it. But even though it summons two psychic monsters from the deck at the same time, you are legally allowed to activate Gamma under There Can Be Only One, and the way it'll resolve is you will summon the Gamma, summon the driver, you will successfully negate the effect, and then immediately after that resolves, you will have to send either your Gamma or your driver to the graveyard, because you can only control one psychic monster at that point. And this, like, some people think that if you chain There Can Be Only One to Gamma, it prevents Gamma from resolving. That's not the case. It'll still resolve successfully, unless you already have like a psychic monster on the field, such as Lambda. So it outlines it here in the PDF. Are there any special summoning card effects that I can activate? You can activate cards and effects that would summon the same type attribute monsters as you have on the field. You can also activate cards that would summon more than one type / attribute of monster. The result depends on what you have on the field. If you don't control any monsters, you can activate cards that would summon monsters with more than one type / attribute. All of them are summoned, but you must immediately pick one type and attribute and send all the others to the graveyard. So if you have no monsters, and you activate Soul Charge and summon 5 different types under Rivalry of Warlords, you're gonna immediately have to pick one after it resolves and send the other 4 to the graveyard. What about Danger Monsters, where it's not guaranteed that it will summon something? I'll get to that. Then it says here, if you already do control a monster, first of all, if the summoning effect targets, you can only target monsters with the right type / attribute. So like a Monster Reborn in the graveyard, you're not allowed to legally target a monster with an illegal type in the graveyard for Monster Reborn. If the summoning effect does not target, you can activate it as long as it is possible to resolve the effect using only monsters with the right type / attribute. In this case, only the right monsters are summoned to the field. So what it means by this is you're legally allowed to activate, like say you have a card that says, I don't know, like you control a monster that's a psychic, and you activate a card that says summon any monster from your deck. You're legally allowed to activate it, provided that you have a legal type in your deck. So under Rivalry, I'll take Rivalry as example. So if you have a psychic on the field and you activate an effect that would summon from deck, you have to summon, you have to be able to summon a psychic monster. And then like legally what you'd be able to do in that case, if you could summon any type of monster, you'd be allowed to like chain something that could clear the psychic monster from your field, and then when the effect that summons from deck would resolve, you'd be allowed to summon any type from your deck. Not specifically psychic, because it checks when the card is resolving. The same rule applies to the Gladiator Beast monsters. So Glad Beasts work like kind of differently in the sense that they shuffle themselves into the deck. You're not allowed to attempt to contact fusion a Glad Beast monster that is of a different type. You can return a Gladiator Beast to your deck and activate its effect as long as there's another Gladiator Beast monster in your deck that you could summon that is the same type / attribute as only turn. However, you have no face-up monsters. When the effect resolves, you can summon any type / attribute of monster. So basically what it's saying, a Glad Beast that's, like say you have Rivalry on the field and you have a Glad Beast that's Beast type. You're allowed to, at the end of the battle phase, shuffle it back and then summon a Wing Beast off its effect, but only if you had a beast to summon off the effect initially when you activated it under Rivalry of Warlords, for example. Can I take control of my opponent's monsters with the wrong type / attribute? This came up a lot with Mind Control being popular, and There Can Be Only One, and Widow Anchor, and Sky Striker, and stuff like that. Say There Can Be Only One is on the field. I control a machine type monster, my opponent controls a machine type monster. I am legally allowed to activate the effect of Mind Control, targeting their machine type monster, and the way this will resolve is you will take control of their machine type monster, and then it will be immediately sent to the graveyard because, now here's a really important thing that you need to note, is that when a new type or attribute is legally enters the field, but then needs to be sent by Rivalry or Gozen, or there can be only one, you do not get to re-pick a type or re-pick a monster. So like, if you look at a card like there can be only one, so it says each player can only control one monster of each type. If a player controls 2 or more monsters of the same type, they must send some to the graveyard, so they control no more than one monster of that type. So the thing that you need to understand with there can be only one, the way it'll work is if you have a machine and you mind control take another machine, there can be only one does not give you the option to re-pick the monster you want to keep. So you can't send your own to the grave that you had and pick the one that you just stole. You absolutely need to send the new monster. So in a situation where, I don't know, like you have a bunch of monsters face down, and you have a monster face up under Rivalry, and your monster face up is a warrior, and all the other monsters you have face down are all different types. And your opponent activates Swords of Revealing Light and flips all your guys face up. You're not allowed to, at that point, if Rivalry is face up, re-pick the type you want to keep, send the one you already had face up, and then keep a different one. You have to stick to the type that you already had on the field face up when like the other monsters enter the field in some way, shape, or form. Anything else I should know? If you control no face-up monsters, you can summon a monster of any type / attribute. Yes. Also, if Rivalry / Gozen is being negated, you can summon a monster of any type / attribute. If it stops being negated, you have to send monsters to the graveyard until you control only one type / attribute again, just like if Rivalry / Gozen had just resolved. This is really important. So, in that same scenario that I gave you guys, with the flipping of the monsters with Swords of Revealing Light and stuff like that, same scenario, but Rivalry is negated. But like Rivalry was active, you control a warrior and 3 monsters face down of different types. And Rivalry gets negated, your monsters all, like you flip summon all your monsters, and then Rivalry starts reapplying again because it's no longer negated, say at end of turn or something like that. You then get to re-pick what type you want to keep. You do not need to keep the type that you initially had picked while Rivalry was active. It's considered like if Rivalry was re-resolving and you now have to pick a new type. You can pick the same one if you want, but you do have the option to pick a new type. And I believe that's it for the PDF. I'm just going to outline a couple of other things that you are legally allowed to do. Tribute Summon. This does not apply to Tribute Set, okay? So under Rivalry of Warlords, you are legally allowed to tribute set a zombie by tributing a spellcaster you have on the field. Another thing you're legally allowed to do is if you have an effect that would special summon a monster face down, you are still legally allowed to activate it, even if you're setting a monster of a different type. So under Rivalry, say you activate the effect of Subterra Fiendess, for example. Shadal Wendy's effect set, when it's sent to the graveyard, it says if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon one Shadal monster from your deck in face down defense position. So under there can be only one. If you already have a spellcaster monster face up, you are allowed to Shadal Wendy, summon face down from your deck another spellcaster monster. That is completely legal. So an effect that would special summon face down is legal, is allowed to resolve under there can be only one Rivalry, even if it's summoning an incorrect type, because the monster will not be face up, it will be face down. Even if it's a card, like, even if it's an effect like you can special summon, this one can summon face up or face down, the flip effect, you're legally allowed to activate it, but you're only legally allowed to set the monster if you're trying to set a monster that has a type that you're not legally allowed to control due to one of these cards. So that's basically the majority, the gist of how Rivalry goes in. There can be only one interact with all sorts of different things. You can look at a bunch of different examples for like the taking of the cards. Like I said, Widowmaker, My Control, Crackdown works the same way. But that's generally how these cards work. So I think it's just important to know that you can't attempt to summon something that you're not legally allowed to have on the field, even if it would clear something else. Oh yes, dangers. Danger monsters work in a completely different way. You are legally allowed to activate the effect of a danger monster under Rivalry of Warlords, even if the danger monster is not of a legal type you're allowed to control. And the reason for that is because the danger monsters are a random effect to summon. It may summon, it may not. And because of the randomness element, you're legally allowed to activate the effect of a danger under Rivalry, even if the outcome was that you had to special summon. In that situation, what would happen? So you activate like Danger Bigfoot and your opponent hits a card that isn't Danger Bigfoot. So Danger Bigfoot's attempting to summon. What'll happen is your Danger Bigfoot will not summon, because if you control a different type and you're not legally allowed to summon the Bigfoot, it won't summon, it won't draw a card. You're basically just discarding a card for no reason, but sometimes that can be advantageous to you, sometimes it can't. So yeah, so that's how Rivalry of Warlord interacts with cards like Dangers. And one last one I want to talk about is Dark Simorgh. Dark Simorgh is kind of funny. Dark Simorgh is kind of funny. So Dark Simorgh is a dark monster, but it is also, while face up on the field, this card is also Wind attribute. What this does is that if you have Gozen match on the field, if Gozen match is on the field, you're only allowed to control one attribute. You are legally allowed to summon Dark Simorgh. However, Dark Simorgh is not a card that can remain on the field while Gozen match is on the field. It will always, always, always end up sending itself to the graveyard, because it is both dark and wind. So if you pick dark, because it's wind, it sends itself to the graveyard. If you pick wind, because it's dark, it sends itself to the graveyard. So Dark Simorgh is not a card that can ever be on the field legally while Gozen match is applying its effect. That's a really interesting, like, little tidbit. It's a neat little interaction. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for the explanation for Rivalry, Gozen, and There Can Be Only One. I hope you found the video interesting, entertaining. If you want to check out my stream, guys, twitch.tv/DistantCoder. Otherwise, I am going to be trying to post to YouTube a little more frequently. I know I've been a little bit infrequent, but I'm going to try real hard. Otherwise, I stream almost every day. So anyways, guys, that's going to be it for me. Have a good one. Peace out, y'all. Bye!